Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this free clip of aggressive progressives on the Young Turks. This is just a preview of what you will receive with TYT membership. That means exclusive interviews, panel discussions, and more of Jimmy, and of course, me. Check out this next clip, and if you like what you see, you can access full episodes of Aggressive Progressives by becoming a member. Head to tyt.com/join now.
All right, so let's do this story, and then we're going to have an interview with an LA teacher right after this. So if you look at this, it says it's about the students. 50,000 LA teachers joined protest accusing the district of hoarding funds instead of investing in schools, which they are. So carrying signs reading, "Stand with LA teachers and education is a human right," educators, parents, and students rallied at City Hall before joining the union's March for Public Education. The union argues that the Los Angeles Unified School District is flush with cash that could be used to provide teachers with raises in one of the country's most expensive cities, as well as hiring more support staff, nurses, and teachers to cut down on class size, which is at 45 students per class. Stef, is that bad, or is that, what is that? How does that affect 45?
Well, you know what they want when it's constructed that way at 45? They want you just to keep them in line. They want them to be servants. They don't want them to be critical thinkers. And 45 kids? How many kids do you have? You have 3.
Yes.
You have 3 kids. Ever get crazy at home with just 3?
Yes.
Right. Imagine when I was teaching for 20 years, the average I had every day was I had about 176 kids. Monday through Friday, 176 hormonal teenagers, Monday through Friday. And class average then was about 38. 38 teenagers in a classroom. You don't want, that's hard to educate.
So
bottom line is that's hard to engage. And I loved teaching and I loved being a good teacher. But when you have 38 kids in a classroom, 45, that's their average. That means they have class sizes that are larger than 45.
Why don't they test them? So if you know how other countries that actually do well on standardized tests, like Finland,
right?
They have 20 kids per class, and they have 3 teachers. And the teacher has a master's degree, and then she has 2 helpers with her.
No, all the teachers have master's degree.
Right, but there's 3 teachers per class for 20 kids.
So we have in the U.S. also.
And then so when we do poorly on our standardized tests, they're like, "Oh, what's wrong? We gotta crack down, and we got the teachers we gotta get rid of the teacher union, and we gotta have charter school." No, just all they have to do is get 20 kids per class.
Yeah, we have in the U.S. those elite teachers and
yes,
yeah, but they're reserved for like the richest people.
Yeah.
They're private schools.
They're private schools.
Yeah, private schools. No private school has 45 kids in a classroom.
No, they have like 18 or so kids, and many of the teachers that teach advanced subjects have masters and PhDs.
Yeah, right, there you go. There's a little bit more to this story. It says, amidst the wealth of Los Angeles, we should not have class sizes of 45 students, said the UTLA president, Alex Caputo-Pearl. He told the crowd, it's wrong that the district is hoarding $2 billion.
That's off the chart.
$2 billion when they say there's no money for the schools. It's wrong when community schools are starving and charter schools are expanding, American Federation. So that's Randy Weingarten, she said that. In some schools, demonstrators argued that districts' refusal to staff the district properly has led to serious safety risks.
Absolutely.
There is not a nurse in every school every day. Some schools get a nurse 1 day a week if they're lucky. Schools nurse Stephanie Yellen-Mednick told the Associated Press, there is simply not enough of us to take care of the kids. How can we afford a nurse for our kids in America? Who's gonna pay for that?
Pie in the sky, Jimmy.
Pie in the sky. So here's a final slide. It says LAUSD is the country's 2nd largest school district, serving more than 600,000 students. Teachers are threatening to strike next month if the school district doesn't meet their demands, providing more support for the city's school children. So if you come to me, they're not striking strictly over a raise in pay, which they do want a raise in pay, but they're striking over stuff like we need support, like we need a nurse here. Or we need more money spent on books or supplies or the buildings. When we come back, and the LA looks like they're probably gonna go on strike. We're gonna have a union leader on the show when we come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Hi, everybody, welcome back to the Aggressive Progressives. As we mentioned in the last segment, the LA Unified School District teachers are upset about their working conditions. And well, right now we have a special guest. His name is Glenn Sachs. He teaches social studies and is the co-chair of the United Teachers of Los Angeles Union at his school. He's also a columnist whose writings have appeared in more than 100 newspapers, including the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the San Francisco Chronicle. He joined with tens of thousands of other teachers who rallied this past Saturday in LA to demand higher pay and better services for the students in the LAUSD. Welcome back to the show, Glenn. How you doing?
I'm well. It's my pleasure to be here.
Listen, Glenn, I heard about this. So there was a big protest last Saturday in Los Angeles, and I heard about it after it happened. So why is that? Why didn't more people know? I mean, it was a huge protest, right?
Yeah, it was a huge protest. Even the media here in Los Angeles, most of which is, shall we say, not on our Christmas card list, even they are saying that we had 50,000 people there. We scheduled it on a weekend this time so we could get other trade unionists to come and support us, parents, students, et cetera. It was a massive rally. It was a real show of force, and it was really our last public act before a possible strike in January.
Well, let me ask you to do me a favor the next time you have one of these big rallies. Could you send an email to Jimmy at jimmydorecomedy.com and let us know? Because I would love to cover that. I would have loved to have been down there with a crew and covered that. So
it'd be great to have you.
Listen, tell me, what are your demands and how is the district responding?
Well, we're crazy radical teachers with all sorts of crazy demands. For example, we're saying that we should not have class sizes of 40, 45, 48, or even 50 students. We're going way out on a limb. We're saying that our schools, each school should have a nurse. In this era where we're promoting reading, each school should have a librarian. We're trying to bring the student to counselor ratio down to 500 to 1. So you can see how crazy and unreasonable we are.
Yeah, it's nuts. But who's going to pay for this is always the question. Now, you say that you make the argument that the district is flush in cash, that it's sitting on $2 billion. Can you talk to me about that? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, for one, nobody's saying that the district doesn't have very real expenses and that they don't have real financial issues. And we know that this whole thing cannot be resolved simply with LAUSD. We need more money from the state. That's part of it. But there is a lot of it that LAUSD can resolve. First we were told their reserve was in the several hundred million range. Then it was 1.2 billion. Then it was 1.86 billion. We just found out last week that it's now up to 2 billion. I don't know, maybe by the end of this interview, it'll be up to 2.2 billion. The reserve just seems to keep going up, and we want them to use some of that to ameliorate the conditions in our classroom right now. And yeah, the district says they're broke. It's kind of like when you're a kid, you have your dying Aunt Sally, and your mom tells you, look, you got to go see your Aunt Sally. She's sick, she's dying. It might be your last chance to see her. And the only problem is that by now she's been dying for 30 years. That's how sick she is. The LAUSD's been saying the same thing for 30 years. They're broke, they have no money, they can't do this for our kids, they can't do that for our kids. It just comes to a point where you don't exactly believe it.
So we've seen the successful teacher strikes all across the country, right? Arizona, and so they all had big support in the community. So here we are in a blue state, right? And in a blue city. And how are people supporting the teachers so far? Is there a lot of support?
Well, I think we have a lot of support. And I think you saw evidence of that on Saturday. There were a lot of people in the community there supporting us. Despite the hatchet job that the pro-charter people have done on public schools and trade and teachers unions and public school unions over the past 20 or 30 years, surveys consistently show that we're still amongst the most respected of all groups, all people in the United States, and we have a lot of support from the community.
And do you think the parents are going to support a strike?
Well, look, as a parent, nobody wants to have a strike. Obviously, it's a big inconvenience. Obviously, it causes problems. I sympathize with that. My kids are grown now, but I can still remember what it was like, and we sympathize with that. But look, if people are really concerned about a strike, if they're unhappy, there's going to be a strike. You need to go tell it to Austin Butner, because we've been horsing around with this for over a year and a half. Negotiating. The district has offered us nothing over a year and a half. The only tangible thing they've offered us, and they make such a big deal about it, is a 6% raise. And we're supposed to applaud, I don't know, they want a parade or something. It's a 6% raise over 3 years. All that is a cost of living adjustment. The government says that the inflation rate right now is 2.8%. So 6% over 3 years, maybe that keeps up with inflation, certainly no more than that. And that is the only thing that they've offered us. Other than that, it's been pretty much nothing substantial on class sizes, nothing substantial on proper staffing, nothing substantial about charters and the way charters are eating away at our school district. Charters are draining $600 million a year from our schools here in LAUSD, and they cherry pick the students they want. They choose the students they want. They leave us with the students they don't want. And then when their test scores show up as higher than ours, they have the goddamn gall to say that they're doing a better job than we are, and our public schools are failing. It's a system that can't work, et cetera. Meanwhile, they have significantly smaller class sizes than we do. So that's another thing that we're trying to address with the district is the charter schools, and like most everything else, they've offered us nothing on that.
So people don't realize that 4 out of 5 charter schools perform no better or worse than the other schools in their district, and they get to cherry pick, and they get to not have unions, and they get to do all this kind of stuff that regular public schools aren't able to do. So
avoid having special ed kids, avoid having so many English learners. Let me tell you what the charter schools are like. Just a brief story, takes 60 seconds. When I was a kid, we used to play, in middle school, we used to play just these football games ourselves out on the yard after school. And most of us were just a bunch of, as far as athletes go, most of us were just a bunch of schlubs. But we had this one really good athlete named Billy. And I remember on the other side, the quarterback of the other team, a guy named Paul, he always used to talk about what a great play caller he was, what a great strategist he was, how innovative he was. And at first I bought him, and then after a while I realized, he dekes here, dunks here, fakes there, gives the ball to Billy, and Billy runs right by us, and that's their success. The charters are like that. The charters love to talk about how innovative they are, and they're so cutting edge, and they take risks and all that. All that stuff is nonsense. I mean, some of them have good ideas, just like, believe it or not, in the public school, some of us have good ideas. The reason why they're outperforming us on tests is because they take the students they want and they push out the students they don't want. That is why their test scores are higher. Nothing more than that.
Can you tell, are there any lessons that you learned, or what lessons should we have learned from the other teacher strikes earlier this year?
Well, I think it's important to realize that almost all of those teacher strikes were illegal. Arizona, West Virginia, Oklahoma, they were illegal. A lot of those states, they're Republican states. They had no right to strike at all as public employees, and they all went out. And the strike, the picket lines were solid, and they all won. Nobody was punished. There was no retaliation. They won. And they were fighting for their students, and we're fighting for our students. As people ask me, why are you protesting? Why are you willing to strike? I don't think I could look my kids in the eye, my students in the eye, if I weren't willing to. If I weren't willing to stand up and fight for them as they sit in classes with 40, 43 kids in them, as they go to schools where you don't even have a full-time nurse, you don't have enough counselors, you don't have any of the basic things that they need at these schools. If I wasn't willing to strike for them, if I wasn't willing to protest for them, I'd be guilty of teaching malpractice.
Now, we saw in Parkland, it sparked the children themselves actually walked out and tried to take control of the situation that way. What do you think the chances are that the kids on LAUSD would actually do something like that because they're tired of being in 45 classes with 45 students and underfunded classrooms?
Well, we have a lot of support from the students. What they're going to do during a strike, I'm not exactly sure. That's a complicated issue. But there's no question that we have a lot of support from the students, and our students understand that we're doing this for them. This strike is not about a potential strike. It's not about money for us. At this point, the district finally has met our financial demand. All this is about money for them. It's about making schools better for them, and I think most of the kids understand that.
Any other question?
Yeah, a quick question. Hey, Glenn, this is Steve Oak speaking. I want to get back to the issue of the $2 billion in extra funds that the district is sitting on. Can you explain why they're sitting on it? I mean, who does it benefit for them to not spend that money? Why wouldn't they want to spend that money to help the kids in the district?
Well, I think it's a combination of several things. I mean, one, I'm not denying that they do have significant financial issues. That is true. And as I said, the union often we get criticized saying that we're focusing only on LAUSD. We need to focus on the state too. No, LAUSD right now, we're negotiating a contract. We're kind of trying to get a decent contract. Then we're going to focus on the state. As to why they won't spend the money, I'm not exactly sure. I think sometimes as teachers, I start to feel like we're Austin Buettner's nagging wife. Austin, the kids need smaller class sizes, and Mr. Buettner's like, yeah, honey, I'll do it. I'll put it on my list of honeydews. I just wonder if they really understand what the situation is like. Another thing too is that they have a plan to divide LAUSD up into 32 different separate entities. And what this really is making LAUSD what's called a portfolio district. And then they're going to start piecing off parts of that district to various charter operators and private agents, private companies, et cetera, charter operators, and basically break up the district and possibly break up the union. So perhaps that's why they don't want to spend the money. Nobody is exactly sure.
Well, hey, Glenn, this is Stef Zamorano. I have a question. Why should I care that there's not a librarian at your schools or nurses at your schools or not enough support staff? How could that actually affect a teacher in the classroom?
Well, it affects the kid. In fact, at our school a couple months ago, we had a girl who had some kind of bizarre peanut allergy. I don't understand a lot about that stuff, but she had some kind of bizarre peanut allergy. And fortunately, when it happened, she had this terrible situation. Fortunately, when it happened, it was one of the 3 days a week where we actually have a nurse, and the nurse went over there and used the EpiPen and saved her life. And the nurse said, if she had to wait for an ambulance, maybe she would not have made it. So I think the district's putting the kids at risk by not having nurses. We're trying to build a love of literacy, a love of reading in the kids. You don't have a librarian. That's a big problem there. I think the counselors are very important for the kids, particularly in this era of school shootings. And I feel like, sometimes these shootings will happen and people say, well, why didn't we notice? Why didn't we do something? How could this have slipped under slipped under the radar? I can tell you exactly why kids like that slip under the radar. The reason why they slip under the radar is that we're so busy. We're so understaffed. We're so busy, we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off in this white collar sweatshop that there's a lot of stuff that we don't notice. If a kid's not giving me a hard time in my class, I'm not really gonna notice. I'm not really gonna have the time to really do anything about it or notice. I'm not saying I have some kid that I knew was gonna go do something horrible and I didn't do anything. But as a general rule, we're way overloaded. We're running around like crazy. And I think it does become a safety issue because I think with us being so understaffed, with having so few counselors, I think it does create a safety issue because some of these kids have real problems and the adults don't notice it because they don't have the time.
Yep. Hey, Glenn, this is Malcolm. It seems to me one of the straightforward solutions to the problem of the nurses anyway is if you only have a nurse in your school 1 day a week, then you don't get sick except on that day. Seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, that's the solution we've been talking about too, yeah.
But I want to talk about the bigger picture with California and its history, because California used to be renowned for having the best schools in the country and universally acknowledged, and now that is far from the case. And I want to know what your perspective is, if you've seen this over your lifetime, where it used to be we would support our schools and schools were valued and education was valued in a way that we just don't seem to, that it isn't today. And I wonder if you could just comment on what we've seen as the cultural value in society changing over that time in your lifetime, where schools they become the punching bag and the first place to be cut universally, and where we don't look to public education as a source of pride, and we just look to it as an excuse to why why usually typically minorities and poor people are failing. So what happened? When did this cultural shift happen and why?
Well, it's a good question. It's a complicated question. I think some of it had to do with the white flight from busing in the 1970s. I think a lot of the issue right now is that LAUSD we're 76% poor, we're 90% minority. And I think that the race question and the class question mean a lot here. I can tell you this, if we were a district filled with white middle class kids, nobody would think, oh, it's okay they don't have a nurse. It's okay that they're sitting in a class with 43 kids in it. It's okay that they don't have a librarian or a counselor. Nobody would say that if these were white middle class kids. But because they're poor kids, they're Latino kids, a lot of them are either here illegally or their parents came here illegally, somehow that's okay for them. So I think you're right. There's been sort of a public disengagement from the schools. I think the average person, the average taxpayer doesn't feel they have the same stake in our schools that maybe they had when you and I were growing up. But it's kind of interesting because we once were the jewel in the crown. We once were a very admired school system, and here you have all these people talking about failing schools. Public schools can't work. Teachers' unions are bad. We need to privatize. We need to charterize, et cetera. Well, what was the problem back then? Back then, we had properly funded schools, and our schools were the envy of the world. And it was a similar system to what we have now. The difference is that now we don't invest the kind of money we need to invest in, and the population of student has grown more poor and more minority.
Glenn, I'm just curious, so let's say I'm a parent in this community. Should I call the district office and demand a meeting with the superintendent and the school board? What is kind of the call to action that just a regular parent could help participate and support your cause?
That's a great idea. I'd love to see you do that. One of the things the union has been wanting is for people to call the school board, because the school board is the one that put Buettner in charge. So they're more or less on board with him. Nick Melvoin and some of the others. Parents can call the school board. Parents can call the district. A big part of this, look, if a strike happens, and I still hope that it won't, but if a strike happens, a lot of it's going to come down to, do they blame us or do they blame the district? So if you as a parent, if you blame the district, I suggest you call them and you let them know that.
So Glenn, this is Steve again. First, I want to just thank you for the fight that you're fighting, because it's a very important one. But I'm also very concerned and lacking in hope. My concern is that because of what you identified as a class issue and as a race issue, that public schools are perhaps doomed. And they're doomed because anyone who has ability to leave the public school system, they can, or they do. They either go to private schools or they try to do the charter schools. And there's so many forces at play from all parts of our society that basically is okay with throwing a bunch of kids that don't look like their kids into the trash bin. They just don't seem to care. What can we do as a society to somehow convince everyone that it's in the best interest of all of us to really invest in all of our children, even the ones who don't look anything like our own, and that just taking our own kids out of that system and allowing that system to fail, just as long as our kids get access to the best education, that's really not the solution. I mean, what can we do, Glenn, to make this work for all of our kids?
Well, I think people are more and more realizing, the charter scam. I think that the charter scam we've been hearing for the past 10, 20 years, more and more people are wising up to it. More and more people are asking questions. More and more people are starting to challenge that model, because what that model will be, it will be that the kids who have higher ability levels, or perceived as having higher ability levels, who are going to be disproportionately white, although there'll be Latinos and black kids there too, they're going to go to nice, well-funded schools with 25 kids in them. And then the rest of them, they're going to go to schools that have 40, 45 kids in a classroom that are almost all minority, and that'll be okay. And then when the charter school scores a higher on the test than the public schools do, it'll just be one more argument as to why we need charters and public schools are bad. That's already happening, and if it doesn't stop, it's just going to get worse and worse. And one thing I'd like to make perfectly clear, because there's a lot of misconceptions about our students in LAUSD and our parents in LAUSD. Our students are smart. They can learn. They have real ability. You see them learning. There's nothing wrong with them. The only thing is they start out further behind the white middle class kid whose dad was a lawyer and whose mom was a psychologist, like my parents were. Those middle class kids, they had an advantage over these kids in LAUSD. But the kids in LAUSD, they can learn. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with their parents either. I mean, I don't know how many times I hear people say, "Wow, it must be so difficult to teach kids whose parents don't care about their education." That is nonsense. It is total nonsense. These parents care about their kids' education. And as a teacher, they will help you. But you have to ask them for something they can do. Most of our parents at my school, and a lot of them in LAUSD, they only made it through maybe 7th, 8th, 9th grade in Guatemala or El Salvador or in Mexico. If I'm going to ask them to help their kid write an essay on the Hawley Smoot tariff of 1930, obviously they're not going to be able to do that. okay? But believe me, when I ask them for something they can do, when I tell them that they need to get their kid into class, when I tell them their kid is tardy a lot, when I tell them that their kid está mostrando una falta de respeto para mi clase, believe me, things change quickly. So they do care, they are on top of it, they just don't have, in some ways, they don't have the ability to help the way an educated middle class parent does. Also, these people are they're stretched very thin. I mean, they're at the bottom of society here, working very hard. They're sending money back in remittances back home to family in El Salvador, Guatemala, or other places. They're stretched very thin, but they are not the problem. The parents are not the problem, the students are not the problem.
Right,
the
Glenn.
system.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you're saying, especially the point about the charter schools being a scam because they take the so-called best students. But my concern is that, yes, and that's why they're gonna keep doing it, because they get to be with other people that are like them, that they think are the best students, and they're more than happy to leave behind other students who, like as you have mentioned, are further behind. They don't care about them. So I guess my question is, what can we do to get people to care about everyone's kids?
Okay, so you're saying that you asked me a question and I went on and on. I didn't answer.
Yes.
It. Sorry. I'll try to get back on point.
Yeah.
Look, the individual parent who sends their kid to a charter school, I'm not going to blame them. I understand it. They want to do what's best for their individual kid. The solution is what Diane Ravitch, who's an educational writer and scholar, what she says is to invest in the public schools, make the public schools good, make them a place you want to send your kid to, make them the place where you want to be. That is the real solution. And there's so many things we could do with our public schools that would make them so much more attractive that we don't do because of budget cuts. I mean, one thing that we used to have a lot of vocational education in our schools. And I think that was very important because in every class you've got a handful of kids, usually a boy, that they're not going to go to college. That's not where their abilities are, but they can make a great electrician, a great mechanic, a great plumber, a great carpenter, all these valuable things that they could do. And when I was a kid, they could go to vocational classes and 1 or 2 hours a day, they could be the A student. 1 or 2 hours a day, they could be the top student. Now we don't have that anymore, and it's all because of budget cuts. There's so many things we could do to make our schools a place you want to be. And it all comes down to spending the money on it. Glenn, I hope I answered your question that
Glenn,
time.
you did. Glenn Sachs, he is co-chair of the United Teachers of Los Angeles Union at his school here in Los Angeles. Thanks for stopping by and filling us in. It's very important, unions, we need more unions to, that's why we have such income inequality. You can track the decimation of unions in America with the income inequality rise. So, thanks for being a union member. Thanks for reminding people how important unions are. And thanks for all the work you're doing, Glenn.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Listen, we have 2 minutes left of the show. Should we recap and remind people February 1st is the live Jimmy Dore show in Burbank, California. It's a Friday night. There's only a few tickets left, actually. We sell out now like a month ahead of time.
No,
so
we don't need to talk about that.
To jimmydorcomedy.com and get your ticket. Because I want to add another show between now and then, but I can't do it until that show sells out. So, how's everybody doing? How you doing? How's your shingles?
It's painful.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here stoically because I'm a tough guy, but I'm in pain.
Okay.
I wanted to point out from the interview with with Glenn, not to say that your shingles aren't important, Steve. Just keep it a distance. The public schools are sort of a little bit of a canary in the coal mine of how the neoliberal agenda, whether it's going to succeed. And the charter schools, defunding the public schools generally, and busting the unions, these are all part of a neoliberal agenda to make the public schools into, create a financial windfall for people who are the testing industry, the charter school people, all these people, so they can suck the money out and then just leave the rest of the kids to fail. Who cares about them? Bigger class size, more. And so when they go on strike and they demand higher wages, they demand nurses, they're saying we're gonna draw a line in the sand on the neoliberal agenda, which is why it's, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's not a real cost to put a nurse in every school and to put a librarian in every school for every day. That's not what the fight is about. The fight is about whether we are going to have a public engagement in our civic society or whether we're going to fall under the neoliberal order where we are all just dependent on corporations for everything, and there is no public sphere anymore. And that's why this fight is so important and why it's so important to them as well. That's my point.
But listen, we're out of time. I hope you get better. We'll see you. Have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, and whatever else you do. We'll see you then.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoy this free clip of Aggressive Progressives on the Young Turks. This is just a preview of what you will receive with TYT membership. That means exclusive interviews, panel discussions, and more of Jimmy, and of course, me. If you like what you saw, you can access full episodes of Aggressive Progressives by becoming a member. Head to tyt.com/join now.